Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and your host for today's show. Today we're going to take a look at cyber risk and data security, and with all that's been happening in our environment and the breaches that we've had and whatever, we thought it might be a good idea if we would go back. We've had some really great shows relative to cyber risk, and we thought we'd go back and give some of those highlights to sort of refresh in everybody's mind exactly what should be going on in the boardroom discussions today. And we're going to look at what's the real challenge for boards, who on the board really owns cyber, what should companies be doing to sort of mitigate a cyber breach, and finally what resources are available. So this is sort of the best highlights, and we hope you enjoy this recap. Thanks a lot. It's a board's responsibility to oversee risk.
Yeah.
So what do you believe is one of the most important things that directors should remember when they have the responsibility of overseeing the cyber risk?
So a couple of things I think they should think about. One is, I don't think they should be afraid of cyber and think that this is something so brand new and so technical that they don't have a handle on it. Boards have dealt with risks of all kinds within their organizations in the past, have adopted new risks over time, and I think if they're skilled and feel confident in doing that, they should have some confidence about cyber. But that said, obviously the biggest risk is doing nothing at all in this space, which is going to leave you vulnerable. But really taking that more holistic approach to how they address this risk. So they're not just looking at protecting against this threat or that threat or the threat of the day, but looking at the most important digital assets that they have. What would be the worst thing that they could lose, right? And building their cyber protections around that, and then having a holistic approach to that. We're very big supporters of the NIST cybersecurity framework, which has kind of like 5 steps to it, identifying those crown jewels, right? Making sure they're protected and everything else is protected, being able to understand, we've seen this in a lot of data breaches, detect if something went wrong. That's a big risk. We didn't know it was happening for 6 months, right? And all of a sudden we've been, hacked for a long time. And then I think really important that sometimes gets forgotten is what would we do if something would happen and how would we recover, right? So taking that kind of holistic approach I think can be really helpful.
I'd like you to sort of walk through those 6 steps so that our audience can understand sort of the recommended structure on making sure that they're fulfilling this oversight duty.
Great. Well, and we recognize the challenge, and that's one of the reasons we put together the guide. So many of the conversations that have been taking place on this topic with boards have been in very much technical jargon, language they don't understand, but there is a language board members do understand, and that's one about compliance and oversight. And so we created the structure to sort of help them think about this particular operational risk in that framework. And so the first of those that we really talk about is, from a people perspective, who's really responsible for this within the company? What's the tone at the top that management is sort of setting? Are people being properly trained? So again, you sort of get the sense that from a people perspective, are we as a company doing what is necessary on this particular topic? The second that we get into is priorities. Look, you can't protect everything equally. And so how has management thought about the specific data protection duties and obligations that the company has taken on? And they're going to come in 2 forms. They're either going to be mandatory, in which case they're driven by statutory or regulatory obligations, or they're voluntary, in which case we've taken on certain obligations from a contractual perspective. The third is, from an operational risk perspective, how do we think about that? And is it properly reflected in the artifacts of the company? And that's sort of in 2 different places. One is as it relates to enterprise technical debt. So those are the business decisions that we may have made with respect to deferring technical upgrades of our infrastructure. Perhaps we've done acquisitions, but we've not done the IT integration, and so we're sitting on a substantial portion of deprecated hardware and software. Perhaps we've gone into countries where we know from our risk register that they, maybe they're not where they need to be on the corruption index, but have we built compensating controls on that? So that's the technical debt aspect. The second part of that is really the third party aspect. Do we understand who we're doing business with? Not just from a customer supplier perspective, but also from a third parties who are doing business on behalf of the company or with the company. And then that takes us into the fourth piece, which is really the threat environment. Do we understand, based on the industries we're in and based on threat intelligence provided by not only the United States government, but governments around the globe where we may operate, do we understand who the threat actors are that are really interested in the company's assets? And here we're talking about specifically their digital assets. And have we built controls in place to understand how to both prevent those actors from getting in and how to detect them should they get in? And then finally, is this topic even resonating in the crisis response side? So there's this whole incident response. It's almost been treated like cyber was this separate thing. The reality is that cyber risk, like other risks to the company, should be part of the broader crisis response plan of the enterprise, and the company should be practicing its response mechanisms around that, including how management engages with the board on those topics, when the board should be informed on those topics, the responsibilities of the board, specifically which committee of the board is going to be involved, when does the full board get involved, what about the communications agenda associated with that. So there's certainly a line that the board understands that's management's responsibility, but there's also a responsibility that the board has, and so part of the reason that we put together the framework is so that both parties could understand their respective roles on this topic.
What are the critical questions that a board member should be asking their head of IT or head of security to make sure that they are understanding the threat to their companies?
Right. Well, one of the things I think that they should want to know is how are we vulnerable? Where are our vulnerabilities, and then what are we doing about that? One needs to understand you're never going to close out the threat. The threat's always going to be present. The question is, what are we doing to tamp that down? What are we doing to address that? What are we doing both on the technology side, but what are we doing on the people side? So when I think about the insider threat, I think of anybody who has access to our information. So that includes call centers that are now internationally based. So what are we doing in that space? What are we doing in terms of messaging? Because that's very important. You can look at technology and look for a silver bullet, but the fact of the matter is people play a very, very important role in our whole cyber defense. So what are we doing in that space with as much as 15% turnover in some of those call centers and in some of our data centers? What are we doing to make sure that that messaging is constant? So what are we doing to both strengthen our defenses from a technological standpoint, but also what are we doing with the human equation? That's what I would want to know.
I think there's three areas that I would highlight from a board's perspective. One is trying to have an understanding, asking the questions to have an understanding of what is our threat, our risk assessment process all about? How do we do that as an enterprise? And then what are we doing to mitigate that threat? So have a good understanding of that process as an enterprise. Secondly, I would want to ensure that we are benchmarking with other companies. What are other companies doing? What are some of the new ideas in the industry? And then are we sharing best practices with those other companies? And then thirdly, are we messaging this to the employees? Does the corporation in toto understand what the cyber area is all about today? Because cyber doesn't just involve data, it involves people.
You know, what I would say to a board member is to think about cybersecurity risk the way you think about all other risks in the corporation. You want to understand what it is and determine whether you're going to accept it, manage it internally, or possibly outsource it. So how do you get to that point if you're a board member? If you're a board member, you want to get an overall governance perspective on how is your cybersecurity team being managed. And there's a couple of key things I think you can do. One, I'd be asking your chief security officer, what is our cybersecurity strategy? And I'd also dig a little deeper and be asking, okay, so what are the key objectives around this strategy? And how are we going to measure them in a way to show we're progressing on this roadmap to be safer? There's a number of ways you can do that, but they should be able to tell you such things as, well, I'm working under a particular framework. So for example, if I'm a regulated entity, what is that framework? Or is it the new NIST cybersecurity framework? How have you identified your assets? What is the risk to those assets? You know, there's 4 or 5 bad actors you want to be looking at: nation state, criminal enterprise, hacktivist, terrorist, and then as Mike and Jeff mentioned, the insider. I think if you get a holistic view of your cybersecurity program within a framework structure like you do everything else if you're a board member, you'll get a better understanding where you sit by way of your risk posture.
What are the current issues that have legal ramifications that board members should be aware of?
Cybersecurity risk, and I'm not talking there about all of the ways in which they try to avoid that risk for the company. I'm talking more about the potential liability risks to the board if there were to be a cybersecurity breach or a data breach that caused some risk of harm to the company. They need to be thinking about a record that shows they have a system in place that was designed to prevent that from happening, and that it was a system that had a very robust reporting requirement, reporting up to the board, and that's all well documented so that the board can defend itself in the event there was a data breach or a security breach. They'd be able to show to a court, because there will be the inevitable litigation, what's known as derivative litigation, saying that the board did not properly oversee the risks that the company was faced with. So I think they should be very conscious of that reporting system and of the system to ferret out and protect against those risks.
Talk a little bit about how you guys are approaching this open communications with companies and what's available to companies today that they may not be aware of.
So you're absolutely right. 10 years ago, big challenge. When we'd walk in and say, hey, we're the FBI, we're here to help. That would be a challenging thing. Nowadays, it's kind of an ongoing way of doing business. The private sector, outside the government sector, is quite frankly where all the stuff is that the bad guys want. We have all the information that we're collecting from different sources that can help the private sector keep their company's information secure. So over the years, we developed numerous outreach programs within the organization to include the Business Alliance and other things that we're utilizing. But the biggest thing that any corporation has available to them in any one of the states in the country, the FBI has 56 field offices across the United States. We have 400 resident agencies, which is like basically little offices off of the big offices. We're also in 123 countries abroad with legal attaches. So it's truly a global organization. Each and every one of those offices have the ability to come in, talk at any level of the corporation that the corporation would like. If they want us to come in and talk to the CEO, the president, vice presidents, the boards, we can. If they want us to come in and talk with the CISOs and other officers at certain levels of the company, we can. And we're very willing to share the latest and current information on cyber threats globally that we see. May not be affecting your company now, could affect it later.
Some companies probably don't realize the risks that are inherent, you know, in them even doing their business. So you would be hard pressed to believe that there isn't anybody that can't benefit from that visit to at least establish the lines of communication if they're needed in the future.
Totally agree. It's better to talk and meet each other way before a crisis happens so that you know the individuals that you're talking to. And even if one doesn't happen, that open line of communication is a way for you to keep current on all the things that's going on around you and around us in this kind of global society that we live in nowadays.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.